If you were an Allied tanker in 1944, pushing through the hedgerows of Normandy or the frozen steppes of Russia, there was one word that could turn your blood to ice: Tiger. It wasn't just a tank. It was a psychological weapon. For years, the German Tiger tank was the absolute boogeyman of the battlefield. Picture this. You are sitting in an American Sherman or a British Cromwell. Your armor is thin enough that you worry a heavy machine gun might punch through it. Then, through the fog, you see that distinctive, boxy silhouette. It was a 60-ton fortress of steel that moved with a terrifying, earth-shaking rumble. It carried the legendary 88mm KWK-36 gun, a weapon so precise and so powerful it could decapitate an Allied tank from 2 kilometers away, long before you could even see where the shot came from. Allied crews had a saying: it took 5 Shermans to kill 1 Tiger, and you had to accept that you were going to lose 4 of them just to get close enough to scratch its paint. It was a mechanical embodiment of the Third Reich's military ambition, over-engineered, terrifying, and seemingly invincible. But then, almost overnight, the world changed. The war ended. The guns fell silent in May 1945. The 1,000-year Reich, which claimed it would rule the world, had collapsed in a pile of rubble. The invincible Wehrmacht surrendered. And suddenly, these metal monsters, the kings of the battlefield, were orphans. This leads us to one of the greatest mysteries of the post-war era. What happened to monsters? When the firing stopped, Europe was littered with them. Germany built over 1,300 Tigers and nearly 500 King Tigers. Thousands of these steel beasts were roaming Europe, North Africa, and the Eastern Front. They were parked in city squares, abandoned on the sides of the Autobahn, and left rusty in open fields from Paris to Berlin. Yet, if you look for one today, they are vanishingly rare. You can't just go find one in a scrapyard. You can't stumble across one in an old barn. Out of the thousands that were built, only 7 original Tiger remain in the entire world today. Just 7. That statistic is mind-blowing. So where did the rest of them go? A 60-ton tank doesn't just vanish into thin air. The answer is a bizarre, twisted detective story that involves secret government testing, Cold War desperation, and heavy industrial recycling. The fate of the Tiger fleet is one of the untold stories of World War II. Some were hunted down by Allied scientists desperate to steal their secrets. Some were captured and actually driven by their former enemies. Imagine a French soldier commanding a Nazi tank. And some are still right beneath our feet. There are rumors, records, and legends suggesting that under the asphalt of modern European highways, massive Tiger tanks are still sleeping in the dark, buried whole by engineers who couldn't be bothered to move them, waiting silently while commuters drive over them every single morning. Today, we are tracking down the ghost of the Panzerwaffe. We are going to find out how the most feared weapon of the 20th century became an endangered species. This is the story of the Tiger's afterlife. The moment the surrender papers were signed in May 1945, the shooting war stopped and the intelligence war began. You see, while the Allies had won the war, the commanders in Washington, London, and Moscow were secretly terrified of what the Germans had built. Throughout the conflict, Allied tankers had often felt like they were bringing knives to a gunfight. Their Shermans and T-34s were reliable, sure, but the Tiger was something else entirely. It was a technological anomaly, a machine that seemed to defy the physics of the time. So, when the smoke cleared, the Tiger wasn't treated as just a pile of scrap metal. It was treated like a crash UFO. It was a treasure trove of engineering secrets that the victors were desperate to unlock. The British, American, and Soviets immediately launched a massive, competitive scavenger hunt across the ruins of the Third Reich. This wasn't just about grabbing souvenirs. This was the greatest technological heist in history. Special recovery teams, often racing against each other, scoured the German countryside. They didn't want to burn out wrecks lining the ditches of Normandy. They were hunting for the unicorns, factory-fresh monsters that had rolled off the assembly line just as the war ended. The most famous example of this obsession actually happened during the war with Tiger 131, which was captured in Tunisia after a lucky shot from a Churchill tank jammed its turret ring. The British were so eager to see what made it tick that they shipped it home immediately. But after 1945, the scale of this operation exploded. The Americans shipped several Tigers across the Atlantic to the Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland. The British hauled them to their research centers in Surrey. The Soviets dragged them to Kubinka, and then the forensic autopsy began. They tore these tanks apart down to the last bolt. They wanted to know everything. How did the Germans manufacture such high-quality optical glass for the sights? How did they weld plates of face-hardened steel that were over 100 millimeters thick without them cracking? How did the suspension handle the recoil of that massive 88 millimeters gun? For a few months, Western engineers stood in awe of the German craftsmanship. They marveled at the precision. It was like looking at a Swiss watch expanded to the size of a house. But as the testing crew spent more time with these beasts, the awe quickly turned to frustration. And then it turned to relief. The testing revealed a harsh, unglamorous truth. For all its terrifying reputation and beautiful engineering, the Tiger was a logistical nightmare. It was a diva of a tank. At the Aberdeen Proving Ground, American engineers realized that the Tiger was almost too complex for its own good. Take the wheels, for example. The Tiger used a complex system called interleaved road wheels, layers of wheels stacked behind each other to distribute weight. It was brilliant engineering, but in practice, it was a disaster. If the inner wheel broke, you had to take off 9 other wheels just to reach it. In the mud of Russia, this mud would pack in between the wheels, freeze solid overnight, and in the morning, the invincible Tiger tank was immobilized, its tracks locked in blocks of ice. Then there was the engine. They found that the transmission was stressed to its absolute breaking point trying to move 60 tons of steel. The fuel consumption was horrific. You measured it in gallons per mile, not miles per gallon. It destroyed bridges. It couldn't fit through standard railway tunnels. And it required a team of highly trained mechanics to keep it running for even a week. By 1946, the major powers came to a realization that changed the future of warfare. They realized that the Tiger was a dinosaur. The future didn't belong to these slow, heavy breakthrough tanks. It belonged to the new concept of the main battle tank, machines like the Soviet T-54 or the British Centurion. These new tanks were fast, reliable, and carried guns just as big as the Tigers, but on a chassis that didn't break down every 50 miles. The Tiger was an evolutionary dead end, and like the dinosaurs, it was about to go extinct once the scientists had learned all they could, stealing the secrets of the gun and the optics. They had no use for the hulls. They didn't keep them as museum pieces. Nobody was thinking about heritage in 1947. Instead, the final indignity for these metal legends was to be dragged out to firing ranges. The few surviving Tigers were parked in open fields and used as target practice for the new generation of Allied weapons. They were blasted apart by the very tanks that replaced them, pounded until they were nothing but unrecognizable, twisted heaps of metal. The king of the battlefield didn't die in glory. It died being used as a punching bag. While the Americans and British were busy blowing up German tanks on firing ranges or shipping them home for scientific autopsies, the French did something completely different. They didn't scrap them. They enlisted them. To understand why, you have to look at the state of France in 1945. The country had been devastated by 4 years of brutal occupation. Their factories were bombed out shells. Their economy was in ruins. And their military had been stripped of its heavy equipment. Yet, France had a burning desire to reclaim its status as a great power and a need to rebuild its army immediately. But you can't build an army without tanks, and France didn't have the time or money to build new ones. However, they realized something important. They were standing on a gold mine. The battlefields of Normandy, the Falaise Pocket, and the countryside of Alsace were literally littered with free hardware. In one of history's greatest ironies, the French army decided that the best way to defend France was to use the very weapons that had conquered it. This effort was spearheaded by the legendary Besnier Squadron, led by Captain Besnier. This unit wasn't your typical military outfit. It was essentially a state-sponsored scavenger team. In the winter of 1944 and early 1945, they scoured the muddy ditches and forests of Normandy. They were looking for the German cats, panthers and tigers, that had been abandoned by their crews due to lack of fuel or mechanical breakdowns. It was a massive salvage operation. French mechanics worked around the clock, towing these 50 and 60-ton monsters out of the mud. They patched up the armor, rewired the engines, and, most symbolically, painted over the black and white German Balkenkreuz, Iron Cross, with the blue, white, and red roundels of the French Republic. For a few strange years after the war, if you saw a column of heavy armor rolling through the French countryside, it looked like a ghost of vision of the Wehrmacht had returned. You would hear the distinctive roar of Maybach engines and see the silhouette of German engineering, but then you'd look closer and see the tank commanders wearing French berets, smoking Gaulois. The French 503rd Tank Regiment, 503 ERCC, actually operated a full battalion of captured German Panther tanks. But the Tigers were the real prize. There's a specific, incredible story from the final days of the war involving the Saint-Nazaire pocket. While the rest of France was liberated, a German garrison held out in the port city of Saint-Nazaire until the very end. Local French resistance fighters, the FFI, managed to capture a Tiger Eye tank that had been abandoned. They didn't just look at it, they fixed it. Imagine the sheer psychological confusion for the German garrison. They looked out from their bunkers and saw the distinctive, terrifying shape of a Tiger tank approaching. They probably thought reinforcements had arrived, but then the turret traversed, the 88mm gun leveled directly at them and opened fire. The resistance used the Germans' own ultimate weapon to hammer them into submission. It was the ultimate return to sender. However, despite the ingenuity and the poetic justice of the French Panzerwaffe, this experiment was doomed to fail. The reality of operating these tanks was a nightmare. Remember, the German supply lines were gone. You couldn't exactly pick up the phone and call Henschel and Son in Kassel to order a new transmission or a box of spark plugs. The factories were piles of rubble. The French crews faced a brutal reality. To keep one Tiger running, you had to cannibalize 3 others. It became a game of diminishing returns. As soon as a transmission blew or an engine seized, which happened constantly with the heavy German cats, that tank was dead. It became a organ donor for the few that were still running. By the early 1950s, the Cold War was heating up, and the U.S. began flooding Europe with thousands of reliable, easy-to-maintain M47 Patton tanks. The French realized that their scavenged German fleet was more trouble than it was worth. The orders came down to retire the beasts. The Tigers and Panthers were parked in depots, where they rusted in the rain. A few were saved from museums, like the famous Tiger II at the Saumur Tank Museum, but the vast majority met the same fate as their brothers in Germany. They were cut apart by torches, melted down, and erased from history. The era of the French Tiger was over almost as quickly as it had begun. This brings us to the saddest, and perhaps the most pragmatic part of the story, the Great Scrap. To understand why the Tiger tanks disappeared, you have to understand a world of 1947. Europe was not the prosperous continent we know today. It was a graveyard. Cities like Berlin, Warsaw, and Hamburg were piles of brick and ash. The economy was completely broken. People were starving, infrastructure was non-existent, and millions were homeless. In this apocalyptic landscape, nobody cared about preserving history. Nobody looked at a king tiger and thought, we should put this in a museum for future generations. They looked at a king tiger and saw one thing: money. A single king tiger contains nearly 70 tons of high-quality nickel alloy steel. In a world desperate to rebuild bridges, railways, and skyscrapers, that steel was worth a fortune. These tanks weren't seen as artifacts. They were seen as massive, inconvenient piles of raw resources. So, the scrapping began on an industrial scale. It was a slaughter. Thousands of tigers, panthers, and panzers were dragged into collection yards. Teams of workers armed with oxyacetylene torches spent years cutting them apart. The sheer quality of the German steel made this difficult. It was designed to resist anti-tank shells, after all, but eventually they were all sliced up. There's profound historical irony here. The terrifying weapon that once shook the earth and destroyed Allied cities was melted down and recycled into the tools of peace. The steel from a Tiger tank likely ended up as a girder in a new office building in Frankfurt, a tractor for a French farmer, or a refrigerator in a British kitchen. There's a very real chance that the vintage Volkswagen Beetle your grandfather drove in the 1950s was made from a melted-down hull of a Tiger that fought in the Battle of the Bulge. But not all of them made it to the furnace. You see, the Tiger II, or King Tiger, weighed nearly 70 tons. Even today, moving 70 tons of dead weight is a logistical nightmare. In 1945, with no cranes and no fuel, it was often impossible. This leads to the most fascinating legends of the war, the buried giants. There were hundreds of cases where Tigers broke down, ran out of gas, or were knocked out in places that were simply inaccessible. They fell into ravines, sank into marshes, or toppled into bomb craters. When the post-war cleanup crews arrived, they looked at these 70-ton behemoths stuck in the mud, looked at their inadequate tow trucks, and made a practical decision: it stays there. The most famous and haunting story concerns King Tiger No. 124. During the German retreat near Paris in August 1944, this massive tank was fighting a rear-guard action near the village of Fonnay-Saint-Père. As it tried to maneuver, it allegedly slid off the road and crashed into a deep ravine or a massive bomb crater. The crew bailed out and fled. When the Allies advanced, and later when French engineers came to fix the road, they found the tank stuck fast. It was too heavy to pull out. It was too dangerous to blow up. So they did the only thing they could do. They brought in bulldozers and simply pushed dirt over it. They filled the crater, leveled the ground, and paved a road right over the top of the turret. Think about that for a second. This isn't just a legend. Historical records and ground-penetrating radar surveys in various parts of Europe suggest this happened more than once. In Poland and Russia, where the mud is deep, there are entire battlefields where tanks sank and were simply left to be swallowed by the earth. To this day, there are quiet country roads in France where the locals tell stories of the monster under the asphalt. It is a chilling thought. Right now, as we speak, there are commuters in Europe driving their electric cars to work, listening to radio, completely unaware that just a few feet beneath their tires, encased in the dirt, lies a 70-ton Nazi war machine. It is still there, its gun pointing into darkness, entombed in the earth, waiting in a silence that has lasted for 80 years. They are the buried ghosts of the war, hidden in plain sight. This brings us to the present day, where the Tiger tank has gone from being a weapon of mass destruction to a creature on the brink of extinction. The numbers tell a grim story of survival. During the war, Germany produced roughly 1,350 Tigers and just under 500 King Tigers. That is nearly 2,000 heavy monsters that once ruled the battlefield. But today, fewer than a dozen of each remain on the entire planet. They are the crown jewels of military museums, guarded like rare art. You can find them standing silent in the dimly lit halls of the Musée de Blinds in Saumur, France. You can see them sitting in the cold hangars of Kubinka in Russia, captured trophies of the Red Army. You can find them in the United States at the National Armor and Cavalry Collection, remnants of the testing done at Aberdeen. But there is one that stands above them all, the holy grail of tank enthusiasts, Tiger 131. Residing at the Tank Museum in Bovington, UK, Tiger 131 is unique. It isn't just a hollow shell or a static display piece. It is the only fully operational running Tiger Eye in the world. Twice a year, the museum holds an event called Tiger Day. Thousands of people travel from all over the globe, from the US, Japan, Australia, just to stand behind a safety barrier and wait. When the crew fires up that Maybach HL230 engine, the crowd goes silent. To hear that engine roar is to hear the sound of history. It is a visceral, chest-thumping bass that vibrates the ground beneath your feet when it moves, spitting mud from its wide tracks and rotating that massive turret. It ceases to be a museum exhibit. For a brief, terrifying moment, it becomes a weapon again. It is a time machine that transports you straight back to the hedgerows of Normandy in 1944. This tank is so legendary that when Hollywood made the movie Fury, they didn't use CGI for the Tiger. They borrowed 131. That tank you saw fighting Brad Pitt, that was the real deal. It was the first time a Rayall Tiger had been used in a war movie since the 1950s, adding a layer of authenticity that no computer effect could ever match. But watching it today evokes a strange, complex feeling. We have to remember what this machine was built for. It was created by a hateful regime to enforce tyranny and conquer a continent. It was designed to kill, and yet, 80 years later, the fear has evaporated, replaced by a deep fascination. We no longer look at it with terror. We look at it with awe. We admire the engineering, the interlocking armor plates, the intricate optics, the sheer audacity of building a 60-ton vehicle in the 1940s. It has become a mechanical marvel, separated from the ideology that spawned it. The Tiger didn't win the war. In fact, in the grand strategic picture, it was a failure. It was too expensive, too complex, and too rare to stop the flood of Allied Shermans and T-34s. It barely survived the conflict. It was built to dominate. But the few that escaped the scrapyard, the blast furnaces, and the burial pits have ensured that we never forget the sheer scale of the conflict that forged them. So, the next time you're at a classic car show and you see a vintage Volkswagen Beetle from the 1950s, do me a favor. Take a close look at the metal. Run your hand over the fender. Because of the massive recycling efforts after the war, there's a very real chance that the steel in that innocent little car was once part of the hull of a king tiger, prowling the forests of the Ardennes. The monsters didn't just disappear. They changed shape. You might just be looking at the ghost of a tiger. Thanks for watching. If you want to know more about the specific battle where Tiger 131 was captured, let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more lost history.